If you're a regular watcher of this channel, and if you aren't, I would ask you to like and subscribe, but maybe you saw a video that I put out a few months ago of a really, really cool archaeological find in what is now today Peru. And the reason I got really excited about this is because as a theater historian, I often deal with documents, ancient scripts, plays, and descriptions of performance. But very rarely do I get to talk very much about archaeology, actual theater sites. Things like buildings and spaces that have been dug up from the ground from ancient societies and cultures. And what makes this particular find from Peru really exciting is that it's so old, and it comes from South America. You see, there's a lot of historical documentation that talks a lot about theater of the past from places like Europe, from places that surround the Mediterranean, Southern Europe, the Levant, North Africa, and we even have really good documentation from places like the Indian subcontinent or East Asia, what is now today China and Korea and Japan. What we don't have is a lot of information on how performance, and more specifically theater or theatricality, might have been a big part of ancient societies and cultures in the Americas. So this particular archaeological find is exciting for that reason. One particular area in culture and society that I think is really ripe for exploration in terms of a beginning point for theatrical ritual, theatrical performance is dealing with death. This is something that every human being has had to deal with throughout all of human history, every society, every culture. In fact, you could, in some cases, say that human culture begins with the experience of death, the attempt to try and conceptualize it, understand it, and in some way move beyond it once it hits your life and hits the life of your community. So death is uncomfortable in a lot of ways, understandably, but it's also a really important point for investigation. Because it's a highly charged, emotional, important event, both within the life of the deceased in terms of memorializing them and remembering them and honoring them, but it's also a place where, because of the high degree of emotions, the intensity of those emotions and the shared effect that those emotions have on all of us because of the death of this individual, a loved one, a community leader, whomever it may be, it's just the perfect opportunity to see performance come out of it in a way that seems very natural, seems very human, but it's also an indicator of cultural expression and societal bonds that are very similar to the way that theater was practiced in the ancient world across many different cultures and places and time periods. So I was very lucky to be able to sit down with the lead archaeologist on the dig site from Peru, Dr. Muro Ynon, to talk to him a little bit more about what he found on his dig and why it is he decided to call that particular site that he found a theater.
Yeah, my name is Muro Ynon, and I'm a Peruvian archaeologist working for the Field Museum as a curator and a scientist. I've been investigating death and death rituals for so many years as an archaeologist, right? And we have, my particularly focus is on the ancient societies of Peru, right, of what is today Peru. And we have a lot of expressions there of how or material evidence of how societies dealt with death, right? And one very human way to deal with death was rituals, right? So rituals were precisely created to try to make sense of what really happens right when we die. I mean, there was these very extensive, complex belief systems that were basically created to deal with the emotions, right, that death brings up, but also to try to understand what happens after, right? So religious rituals, performances, funerary spectacles, which we have been able to trace archaeologically, are very clear manifestations of how people reacted and how people responded to death.
It's good. That actually works as a great transition into the next kind of aspect, particularly with your research and everything. You've linked funerary practices with performance in the context of ancient Peru, as you've mentioned here. And I want to quote to you something that you wrote and get kind of your feedback and your response on it. So this is from your chapter, Performing Death, from the book Beyond Death, Beliefs, Practice, and Material Expression. And you say, in both elite and non-elite residences, spaces were delimited exclusively for such consultative practices. Performances of ancestor commemoration in ancient Peru were complex and, in many cases, constituted long and large-scale events. So what are you referring to there? What are we talking about when we talk about these commemorative events or performances around death that were happening in ancient Peru?
That's a very interesting question and really gives me the platform to speak about my research because, I mean, ancient Peruvians were particularly obsessed not only with death as a natural phenomenon, but also they were particularly obsessed with the connections with the ancestors, right? So the ancestors played a very critical role in the way how they organize, right? How organized in like different ways, socially, politically, in the religious sphere as well. So there are, for example, these historical records describing how the Incas, for example, brought the mummies of of past Inca kings into the plazas, right? So they engage, right, one another in dialogues, right, like the living and also the death. They engage in dialogues, and the ancestors were also part of this decision-making process in the political arenas, in the religious arenas. So ancestors were extremely important in the ancient Andean life. So as archaeologists, we have found like a very significant, large amount of data suggesting that ancestral veneration practices were a very key component in the social life of the domestic household unit, right? So people were not only organizing their space around the veneration of the ancestors, but they also engage in very significant ways with the ancestors in every aspect of domestic life. In the most ancient, household structures in the Andes, we have also been able to document that they were being buried, their ancestors, underneath their houses. So.
And you draw that parallel with Çatalhöyük.
With Çatalhöyük as well.
Yeah, in modern-day Turkey. Is this roughly the same time period? What are we talking about in terms
of
well,
Çatalhöyük is one of these oldest settlements, right, that have been documented for the Neolithic finds in Europe, right? And like Ian Hodder, for example, and all this Stanford team have been able to document that the people here have been buried their esteemed ancestors right underneath their houses. This a feature that seemed to be something very particular of ancient Europe actually has been also documented in the ancient Americas. So this seems to be a practice that has been widespread, like in different ancient societies. That might also be related with the explanation of why people settle down in specific places in the landscape. So it seems that ancestors were placed there, and after that, they settled down on those places as a consequence that the ancestors were buried there. So when you put that into an historical perspective, you really figure out the importance of ancestor veneration, right, in the evolution of human society.
I'm no scholar of the Americas, and certainly not South America, and so I learned a lot in my conversation with Dr. Ynon. And one of the things that I found really exciting was his discussion of the Moche culture, and these group of people who are pre-Incan, who lived largely on the western coast and the northern part of Peru, and how they honored their dead, and how they remembered their dead, and how they did it in very performative ways that strike us as kind of highly ritualistic, but also ways that seem very celebratory and very memorializing, and not necessarily always about some high-minded ritual of some kind, but more so about a means of communication and connection. both as a society but also to the past for that society and that culture, that city, those peoples. So it's really interesting to me that performance is this binding glue that is born out of the experience with death, but also the way that death lingers in our minds and between one another as kind of this memorialization that we tend to do.
For the case of the Moche, which is one of the pre-Inca societies that I've been doing research on, so we know based on not only archaeological records, but also by the images that they basically have created on their own elite vessels, right? That part of these large-scale events, large-scale, basically spectacles, had as a central action the transformation of individuals into powerful ancestors and powerful deities. Something very interesting happens with the Moche, actually, that they, the most important elite individuals are buried as deities, right? So they are transformed in public spectacles, which are basically like everybody have access to see these, like, you know, kind of like public performances. The centrality of that was probably the transformation of these individuals into deities, and they were buried as gods or goddesses. So there was a very central role, right, in how the death is transformed into a supernatural entity, and that transformation was public. That transformation was transformed into a public spectacle.
Now, I love Dr. Ynon's perspectives on death and ritual and performance, and how all of this kind of combines together for a type of theatricality that really needs a space of some kind. And while the Moche are a little bit later culture that we can look to, that we have a decent archaeological record for, that will tell us something about this culture, the way that they might have practiced their performance, and to some degree we might be able to call it theater based upon the evidence that we still have. What he has found in this site that he's recently dug up is something that really does kind of pinpoint a place, a location, for the potential of ritual being something more than just performance, being a little bit more than just about the death of someone you love or care about and then keeping them close to you in some performative way in kind of a domestic sense, or even just a civic sense, that this is a space where something is performed that is potentially bigger than just the space itself.
So you found a site in Peru. You've only been digging since June of 2024, is that right? So you found something pretty quickly.
Yeah.
How did that happen? Because I don't feel like that ever happens in archaeology.
Yeah, very, very little chances. So after working so many years in the Jequetepeque Valley, which is one valley located in the north coast of Peru, full of Moche sites, right? After working there for so many years, I decided to move onto a second valley that is located farther north. That valley is a small valley called Saña, right? So in the Saña Valley, I have started a new archaeological project, a new excavation project in 2022, basically with the aim of understanding the Moche religion, but also what motivated or what were the circumstances in which Moche religion emerged. For so many years, I was basically focusing my attention on funerary performances, on Moche death, but very much in the later part of the Moche cultural history. But in my new project in the Saña Valley, I basically move into the beginning of everything, so to the emergence of the Moche. So focusing my attention on actually what we call early Moche sites. But in 2023, we decided to basically do a survey. So basically, try to identify different Moche sites located along the valley. So that I was basically with my team in the summer of 2023 with two of my archaeologists, just like documenting sites. We received a call basically from the authorities of the Peru's Ministry of Culture. So a very good colleague, from Carlos Wester, from the office of the ministry, he called me and told me, and he was like a really, really panic, right? And told me, Luis, you have to stop by. I mean, you are in Saña, you have to stop by. There was like a little site near the river, right, that was being dramatically looted. So when I went, the police had already arrived. and the looters had escaped. But we had the chance to see a little bit of the affected area, right? We saw some of the looting holes that they basically, made. We saw something that was like very strange, like some walls with evidence of plaster and also mural paintings that we saw on the looting holes. So we were, what is this? At the beginning, I imagined that was a Moche site, right? Because of course I'm very much interested in Moche. I see Moche everywhere, so I saw that's a Moche site. That's probably a Moche temple, a Moche structure. And then that was like July of 2023. So it was almost 1 year after, in June 2024, right? Just like 5 months ago, that we basically planned a project and we started the excavations at that particular site. So we opened the excavation there and we found all what you guys have seen all over the news. It was basically the facade of a monumental temple, right? That was decorated with high relief designs, but in a very particular form, right? Because these designs, when actually we were able to expose part of that wall, that decorated wall, we saw that the designs were made of, they were part of a hybrid creatures, right? There's one particular panel showing a hybrid creature that seems to have elements of a bird and also a kind of reptile, but with a human body. So it's a kind of, like a half human, half animal creature that was actually replicated on another panel, right? That was almost in front, right? So at the beginning, we had no idea what was the architectural setting of this space. But then as we continued with the excavations, we realized that this was the facade of a temple, right? And in that facade, we had these two creatures, right, that were depicted on two panels. In the middle, we had a staircase, and that staircase leads to a stage-like platform.
Yeah, so there's a part of this that's you're calling kind of a theater, but it's on this platform. So
it's a stage-like platform, okay, right? Yeah. And with some back rooms that seem to be like preparation rooms. But something more interesting actually happens, that right in front of this facade, right, of this temple, we excavated like a kind of a mounds, right, that seemed to be just like a very natural sand dune. But it ended up being a Moche pyramid that actually was completely buried with the sand.
So a later Moche.
Which was exactly. So these two structures, where the frieze and the high relief designs were located, and the second pyramid, we're basically facing one another, right? So this actually, we realized that this is a very much larger religious complex, probably, containing religious structures that were built by different people. So we are, of course, in the process of dating, because we're, we have just sent C14 dates for, determining exactly what is the period of time of these two structures, right? I was
going to ask you about that, because I saw in your article that you were trying to date some of the pigments. So
exactly.
Do you have a date yet, or are you still waiting?
No, we are still waiting for that. But we have already sent some organic samples to the C14 lab at UC Irvine. So we are very looking forward to receiving the results. However, the designs that we found in all the mural designs, right, including this high relief motif and some other designs of some other mural paintings, indicate that actually this is a structure related to what we call the initial period. The first temple, the first structure that I mentioned to you, it has the configuration, the style, the construction materials, and the designs of other similar initial period constructions. Despite of the fact that we don't have C14 dates yet, right? We archaeologists have other dating methods, something that we call relative dating strategies, right? So in this case, like that is the first construction, as I said, the style, the tapia structures, which is a very particular construction technique. The layout of the space, as I said, like with a stage-like platform and with back rooms behind. So everything is very eloquent, and pointing that this structure is contemporary with other known initial period constructions. Okay. So it's very likely that this construction was made in this specific period of time, which is a period of time that goes from 2500 BCE to 500 BCE. So we are probably speaking about a site that was constructed, in the best scenario, probably 4,000 years old.
So you were telling me about you've got these panels on a left and a right wall, or reliefs, and you've got stairs that go in between them up to a platform. So before we get to the platform, or do you think that the space where you are at the bottom of the stairs, is that inside the temple then? And then you would go to a platform which would be facing outward to an exterior view, is that right?
Yeah, very, very good question. Speaking more about the architectural layout, yeah, indeed. Like in front of these staircases, we have a very restricted patio, right? Meaning that probably just like a very few people could have witnessed whatever happened on the platform. But right in front of that patio, there is you have like the whole desert landscape, right? So we have not found the entrance to this patio, right? But that patio is right in front of the landscape. So it's on a side of the mountain that really allows you to have a view of everything, of the forest, because this side is in the middle of a forest, and that forest is surrounded by desert. So the site in itself is very interestingly located at the intersection between the forest and the desert. When you are standing on that patio, you have a visibility of everything. So that patio is restricted, as I said, so probably allowing no more than 20, 25 people standing there. But from that patio, you have an incredibly nice visibility of the whole landscape. So that patio, so if you walk on the patio, right, you come across with the staircase, right? You take that staircase and you basically reach this stage-like platform with an incredible visibility, right? Next to this staircase, on each of the sides of the staircase, you have these two panels with these mythological creatures, which are like very nicely preserved, right? And so it's really provoking to think, right, that somebody like dressing probably as one of these creatures stand on the platform and lead some type of performances that was dedicated or was visible to the people standing on the patio in front. And then when like behind the stage like platform, you have like a type of corridor, right? Really like for me, I mean, as a performer, as a former performer, when you walk on this type of corridor, it really looks like a backstage, right? Like somebody was preparing themselves in these spaces and then, walking on these corridors until that person reached the platform. And then that person like descending the staircases. And when that person, reached the patio, it was basically standing just like in the middle of these two mythological creatures. So visually speaking, I mean, when you consider the architectural layout and when you also consider the flow of movement, it really looks like a theater space. Of course, like a performance setting, as you have correctly, mentioned it.
Yes.
But it really, so I know that word theater is like it has a different connotations, right? We cannot say that there was a theater as a practice in ancient Peru. We have no proof of that. But we have performance settings from very, very ancient time, right? From Caral, which is a site that has been dated by 5,000 years BCE, right? Because we have circular plazas, circular performance settings, right? All the way throughout the cultural history in the Andes. So we have many performance spaces. But what is particularly relevant about La Otra Banda, our find, is that this seems to be one of the very first sites in which we see not only the performance space, but where we see the deities represented.
Okay.
So that is one of the most remarkable aspects of this site. So these classical figures that we see in these two panels that we have discovered, they are probably one of the most ancient representations of this deity that is represented like throughout the Andean cultural history, like very well manifested, for example, in later temples such as Chavin de Huántar, for example, Sechin, and many others.
I'm just struck by your description of the site too, and I respect your reluctance to maybe call it theater. Theatrical seems very appropriate, but what strikes me is the way you describe the navigation of the spaces in the site and how they're connected or how they might be connected to one another. And I think in thinking about what makes a theater space specifically for theater, and I think of a lot of ancient cultures when I think about this, everything from the ancient Greeks to Japanese no and kabuki theater, and other forms of theater as well, where there's this space where the performer has a moment or is being prepared for the performance. It's like this liminal space between the world that they occupy as a human being and then the in-between becoming space where you go from your humanity to being prepared for whatever it is you're about to represent, whatever it is you're about to perform. And the corridor that you describe really fits with that really well. And then to have a staircase, like, it's just so theatrical.
Yeah.
It's a spectacle, right?
It's a spectacle, yeah.
Did that strike you the moment you saw it?
Absolutely, absolutely. As I said, I think like it's inevitable for me as a former performer, to always immediately think about the performativity of these spaces. It's just like, it's impossible for me not to envision myself standing on that platform and see what might be the impact of my movements on those stage when people are looking at me. So it's impossible. I cannot avoid that because, we artists, performers, as soon as we see artistic spaces, we project ourselves on those spaces, right? And the centrality, because I had the chance to stand on that platform, and the centrality of my body in relationship to the architectural space, but also the whole landscape, is also very remarkable. So it's really like being in the middle of everything. So of course I understand just like suspicious of calling this space theater space or performance space, right? But we archaeologists have been struggling a lot to really differentiate, all these nuances about the use of, what performance is, first of all, right? That's a very complex terrain, right? What are the components of the concept performance for you to really interpret that space as a performance space, right?
Well, even if we're talking about like a space where there's few to any people inside of it, but it still has this kind of cavernous feel, I think we could still say, I hope you would agree with me in saying that the space is performing in that case, right?
Yeah.
That it's taking on this quality of being large and vacant or cavernous and big, and that the person, if there's maybe 1, 2, or 3 people in these big spaces, that they're meant to feel very small. So that relationship is still performative.
It's still performative.
We can still call it that.
Even if it's just like yourself there and you're performing for the gods, for the goddesses, for the ancestors, for the deities. From my perspective, that will still fit within a classical performance definition, right? Because it's more like, for me, like the power of the non-verbal communication, what actually that actually makes that action a true performance, right? So from that perspective, yeah, I'm really convinced that that's a performance space. But the centrality, as I said, like returning to the point of the stage-like platform, the centrality of your body, the affordance of your body standing on that platform, and also the impact that probably that created on people looking at you, I think what is really striking to me.
You just have this sense that there's some kind of, whether it's the ancestors or whether it's a collected audience, that it's a space for visual, like it's a space to be seen.
The centrality, the centrality that occupies that platform, and also in relationship, as I said, to other architectural elements in that space, right? It's really, really striking. Through this excavation, we have only been able to expose, I would say that 5% of the site, right? And this is something that we have exposed part of the facade, right? We are very much looking forward to continue the excavation, which is something that we're gonna do like this summer, 2025 summer, and to really see how that space that we have found is actually connected with a much larger architectural complex that is certainly there, but we have not been able to expose yet.
That's exciting. So you are going back this summer?
We are going back this summer. Yeah, we already, we have funds secure to continue with our excavations. We're very excited to see not only to complete the picture of the site, but actually to really examine how these spaces had a role, in the development of these ancient human groups, because it seems to be that theatricality, drama, performance settings had a very central role in how religion emerged, right, in these very ancient societies. And I think that is probably what is behind of our research agenda, to try to understand the centrality of theater and performance in the human condition.
So I don't know. What do you think? Should we call this site a ritual site, a performance site, a theater site? It's probably still too early to say, and I'm going to keep following up with Dr. Ynon, and hopefully we'll know more about what he uncovers in future digs, so that we can determine to some degree the type of performance event that would have occurred in a space like this. But nevertheless, the fact that we have found this space, given the age that it is, given the part of the world that it comes from, given the kind of antecedent that it might be for the culture that comes after it, this is a really important archaeological find. It's incredibly valuable in understanding ancient human societies, ancient human cultures, particularly ones from South America, and their relationship to performance. And whether we call it theater, or whether we call it ritual, or whether we call it something else entirely, what's important is that human beings made sense of the world around them through the act of performance. And they built spaces to do that, to create a coming together of some kind in a way that charges performance with some kind of unspeakable nature, right? And turns it into something more than just people standing in front of other people and doing things and saying things. Suddenly these things that they say have meaning, and the things that they do have purpose, and all of that comes together to make better sense of the world, or at least to make us feel a little better about the world. And if theater doesn't do that, then I don't know what else to call it. So that's what makes this site, and Dr. Ynon's find and his research on these types of sites and cultures, so valuable and so important. It actually makes me feel less alone as a human being living in the time that I live in, because I know that someone like me, eons ago in the past, in a part of the world that I've never even been to, felt something similar. And that across all that time and space, I can share that with that human being. And hopefully, maybe soon, and I'll take my camera with me if this happens, but I hope that I can go visit this site and show you a little bit more about it. But for now, we'll wait for updates from Dr. Ynon. And until the next one, thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and there'll be more theater history coming soon. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Dr. Kyle A. Thomas, the theater history professor, and I would really love it if you would like and subscribe, follow this channel, because I will be releasing more content soon. If you've been someone who's been following this channel for a while, you probably know that there's been a big gap right in the middle of when I used to release a lot of content, and lately I haven't been doing quite as much, largely due to a big move, but that's all behind me now, and I'm really excited about some new things that are coming up. If you've been following the Cheers and Booze series, there will be a new episode on beer and theater coming out very soon. I promise you, I'm not lying about that. I know I've mentioned it in the past, but it is definitely coming very soon, so please look out for that. And at the very least, hey, thanks for watching this video. If you like this content, please let me know. Definitely give me a little comment down in the comment section below. I do respond to those when I can. And thanks so much for watching.